It's lagging. Is it on? Can't even tell if it's on. We're having technical difficulties if we're live on the air right now, but I can't tell that we're live on the air right now because we're having technical difficulties. There we are. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the final edition of Trojan Dash for the 2020-2021 season, USC men's basketball season. I'm Nathan Ackerman, one of your co-hosts, joined, as always, by my co-host, Anthony Grieve. Anthony, be honest with me, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
Well, I'm doing better than yesterday, that's for sure. But it is what it is. What about you?
Yeah, yesterday was a tough one, and it was made maybe a little bit slightly more tough by the fact that USC missed out on the Final Four and UCLA managed to get in. But kudos to them. They're an 11 seed in the Final Four. That's super impressive. They're having an awesome run. They're probably going to get destroyed by Gonzaga, but we will see how that goes. USC's season obviously came to a loss last night with a 19-point loss to Gonzaga in the Elite Eight after a nice 14-point win over Oregon in the Sweet 16 to put them in the Elite Eight. Anthony, to me, look, they beat Kansas by 34 points after beating Drake. They beat Oregon, and then they lost to the number one overall team in the country. They were a number 6 seed. They were one of the final 8 teams left. I guess technically one of the final 6 teams left if you account for the fact that 2 of the Elite Eight teams played before the Trojans and were eliminated before them. But, in that group of the final 6 to 8 teams, it was an exciting run for them, an exciting season. Give me your main takeaways from the way that the season ended and just your initial thoughts as you saw the clock wind down to triple zeros. What was going through your mind?
Yeah, well, it's an extremely memorable season. I mean, I definitely think it's one of the best program has ever seen, if not the best. Going to the Elite Eight after a certain time where they didn't have a summer. Andy Enfield talked about it. They hadn't even met half of the players in person until September 1st. So to build all that, get ready for a season with COVID restrictions and not having full practices and not having scrimmages, and then putting that all together in a 25-win season and getting the 8 seed and making it to the Elite Eight. It's an amazing season. Something that they should be very, very proud of, especially with only basically 3 rotational players coming back from last season, and adding in a bunch of transfers, a bunch of new faces, players that had never played with each other before. It's very, very memorable. Something that, for me personally, as the clock was going down, I really didn't want it to end. I knew the end was coming, but it's been one of my favorite teams to watch, to be honest. Their defensive intensity, their effort on both sides of the ball, the growth of not Devin Mobley, but Isaiah Mobley too, has been really fun to watch. And obviously how the pieces have come together. With players like Taji, Drew Peterson, and we keep going. But it's gonna be one of my favorite when I look back. It's gonna be one of the seasons I'll always remember. I'll never forget it. I'm happy I was able to go to some games, see them in person. Obviously the ending, Elite Eight. We were always asked, how do you think they're gonna do in March Madness? I always said Elite Eight, perfect scenario, and it happened. I can be content. They lost to Gonzaga. Geez, everyone has lost to Gonzaga this year. I mean, that's not big. That's not even a big deal. It's going to be one of the best seasons, really. And Andy Enfield said it too. He said this is a team that's going to be remembered forever in USC basketball history. I think they elevated the program to national levels. No one, first of all, expected them to be here. Voted 6th in the preseason poll and become a 6th seed, and then go to the Elite Eight. And like you said, maybe even the top 6 teams. So, it's a season that they'll always remember. I know the players had real great chemistry off the court as well, not just on the court. And it was a fun team to follow. I mean, a lot of characters, a lot of great talent. It seemed like every game something crazy would happen, and every game was different, but not even in a bad way. Most of the time, it was in a good way. And usually, USC is known for their football, but this year, they kind of show that, the basketball program, it exists. And it's 2 years in a row now. We'll get into it later. 2 years in a row now, the program has been outstanding. Hopefully, it's something to build upon. But, I really didn't want it to end. I knew it was coming. I knew they would eventually lose. I knew after March it was done. But the fact that it's over now, it's a little depressing. I'm not going to lie, because I'm going to miss watching them. But hopefully next year, it'll be as good as this year.
Yeah, I think where I come from is I think when it comes to March Madness specifically, it's not championship or bust, right? If you make the MLB playoffs or if you make the college football playoff, you're thinking, okay, we're in it. Let's go win this thing. And if you don't, you feel like you fell short. I don't think that's the way it works in a single elimination, total crapshoot. Upsets happen all the time. There's 64, 68 teams technically in the field. And with the Trojans, it was never they win the championship, great. If they don't, then it was a failure, right? So I think the fact that they got as far as they did is, really speaks volumes about how good this team is and how far they've come. And part of me was thinking, man, if they had beaten Gonzaga, now all of a sudden you're looking at this like they have a chance to win this whole tournament. You play UCLA in the Final Four, and then the winner of Baylor Houston. They probably wouldn't have been favored, or they would have been favored in that first game. I'm almost sure, probably not in the final game. But I mean, you're looking at this picture and you're thinking, wow, they actually have a chance to win this thing. So part of me was like, wow, they were really close. But then part of me was like, they were not really that close because Gonzaga is just so good. It seems to me like it's Gonzaga and then everybody else. Baylor has a case for being in that, I don't know, tier 1.5. But it's not like I came away from that game thinking, man, if they had just played a good, complete 40 minutes of basketball, or especially in the first half because they tied the second half, then like we could have been talking about them as national champions. They would have had to play the best games of their lives on both ends of the floor, and even then, it would have probably been a coin flip. So I didn't come away from that thinking like what a missed opportunity there. And then I think part of it too is what you were talking about, how this team was good last year. And if March Madness had happened last year, I think this team could have gotten pretty deep. If you remember at the end of last year, they were sort of hitting their stride at the right time. The season ended March 7th, I think, with that Jonah Matthews step back three against UCLA to win that game by a couple points. And then heading into the Pac-12 tournament, they had a first round bye. Who knows what they would have done there? Probably would have won a game or two, maybe three. And then you go into March and you're like, this team can make a Sweet 16, maybe even Elite 8 run. And the fact that that was taken away, it really left you feeling like, they kind of have to make up for that. I mean, not that that was obviously any fault of their own, but it would be really nice to see them do something deep in 2021 in March Madness, and they definitely did that. So I think, obviously we wish that 2020 tournament had taken place, but I think that the way this one played out, it definitely gives us a little bit of that back. And I think this team is headed in a great direction. I think, as you said, people are starting to recognize this as a legitimate basketball school. I mean, people were saying before the Gonzaga game, like USC could win that game. And I was thinking it too, because, I mean, the Zags really hadn't played a team quite like the Trojans. I mean, I think the whole, they're in a bad conference, they don't play anybody, is a little bit blown out of proportion, but it's true that they hadn't played a team as tall as the Trojans because, there is no team as tall as the Trojans. So I think if you got a defensive effort that was, again, one of the best of the entire season and of everybody's entire lives, then they could have competed in that game. And the fact that you're talking about the fact that people across the country and media, fans, whatever, were talking about USC having a chance against Gonzaga, which is honestly one of the best college basketball teams I've ever seen. They're so clean. They just play beautiful basketball. That alone, I think, is a really good sign of the way that this program is sort of recognized and the way that it's being respected on a national level. And that's obviously a product of how well they performed on the season. So the fact that they lost to the best team, I didn't leave that game feeling upset. I was kind of like, they lost to the best team. They had a great season. It is what it is.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. I mean, I expected it coming in. I had I had a glimmer of hope. Maybe, you never know what can happen. It's a one-game scenario. But I definitely didn't come out of it upset about the loss. I was more upset that the season was over. That was really the only reason why I was sad, because I expected that outcome. And Gonzaga, like you said, you could even argue that they're the best college team, just the way they played. It seems very professional. Got backups that could start on other teams. So you kind of expect that coming in. But yeah, more upset. Not even at the loss, not about the way they played. Obviously, the first couple of minutes had a bunch of turnovers, but after that, really, I was just didn't want the game to end. More upset the season was over, especially the potential and everything we just talked about.
All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot real quick, and then we're gonna move on. I want to hear your top 5 games of the USC basketball season. I'll give you mine, but you have some time to think. Number 5, Stanford. They won that game something like 79-44. It was just an absolute thrashing. Trojans wire to wire. It was their game the entire way. One of the best performances of the season, and one of the 2 that I got to see in person. So that was an awesome one. The first game against Oregon, where they went off to a 17-1 start, and they allowed, I think it was, 19 points in the entire first half, 18 or 19 points in the entire first half. Incredible game. It kind of set the scene for the Sweet 16 game, based on the way that the Pac-12 played out, and, SC sort of feeling like they were both 10 games over 500 in the Pac-12 standings, but USC won the head-to-head. So, by rule, or it's the Pac-12 title, but who deserved it more is up for debate. And I think it's because of that game, because of how well they played. Third best game on the season, the UCLA game, the Taj Edey fadeaway 3. Just an incredible game, one that you'd never really felt like they had a chance to win until there's 2 minutes left, and all of a sudden they go on this huge run. And I think they only led for 1.4 seconds in that entire ball game. But that 3, and then given the context of who it was against, given what happened last year with the Jonas, that was incredible. That was so much fun. That was, I think, the third best game on the season for the Trojans. The second best game, Oregon in the Sweet 16, in the Sweet 16. The way that it wasn't the prettiest basketball game. It wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing basketball game, but the way, given, like I said, the context of everything that happened in the Pac-12, with the way that played out, and some of the Trojans feeling like they stole the Pac-12 title away from them, and then, finally putting an end to the Oregon winning every big game in the major sports between these 2 schools was awesome to see, and obviously it sent them to the Elite Eight, and that was super fun. And then the Kansas game. This was the only tournament game that really surprised me, because the Drake game, the Oregon game, I thought that they were going to win those games, and then the Gonzaga game, I thought they had a chance. If I had to put my money on somebody, I would have picked the Zags, of course, because they're just so dominant. But the way I entered that game really having no idea who would win, probably picking Kansas if I had to. And it was just from the gate, they were playing incredible basketball, offense, defense, everything. They just looked like they were having so much fun, and they beat Kansas, a perennial basketball powerhouse, by 34 points to go to the Sweet 16. That was super exciting. Those are my top 5 games on the season. What do you got?
Yeah, that's a good top 5. I'm not gonna try to use all of them. I actually want to put an honorable mention. This was really one of my favorite games to watch, even though it was a frustrating game. It was the game against Utah in the tournament, and for one reason, and that was because Evan Mobley, he was playing just complete basketball, and it was just unbelievable to watch. I thought he was outstanding, and that was a fun game for me to watch. So I would put that one as an honorable mention, not enough for the top 5. But put me on the spot. This is good. But number 5, this is an early one. I would say the one against BYU.
That was good.
And I kind of realized. Yeah, I kind of realized once I saw that, wow, maybe this team is a little different. You saw their defensive potential. They played against Matt Arm's 7-footer. So that was a fun game for me. And then I would also say, you mentioned the Stanford game. I'm gonna say the Stanford one too.
Yeah.
That one was just outstanding. I mean, overall, just defensive masterpiece. It was very fun to watch and very fun. Actually, I think I might have. Oh no, I wasn't at that game, but that was a great game to watch too. And then I'll think of for sure the UCLA game. I'm actually gonna put the second one. I think the first one, because the first one, there was a lot of what ifs going into that in terms of, for me, because I really didn't know how that game was going to play out. Obviously, UCLA was without some key players, but the way USC took them and how well they shot the ball, and just it was a total effort from beginning to end. And obviously against the rival UCLA, that was a great win. And then I'll probably say the second one.
I might have stolen all the best games.
I was gonna say, because I was actually gonna mention I think the first Oregon game.
Yeah.
I mean that game was great to watch, because I had the same feeling as the UCLA one. I was, because their matchups have been postponed every time. I was like, well, I'm a little worried about this one. So I would say number 2 Oregon, and Kansas is like the no-brainer for number 1.
Yeah.
I had the same feeling as you. Definitely didn't expect that to happen, and it was just that was just a perfect game.
Well, I definitely did put you on the spot. You did great, Anthony. Let's get into some postseason awards, and for this, we're gonna sort of leave Evan Mobley out of this conversation because when you win every Pac-12 award known to man, it's kind of hard to give any awards on your team to anybody else. So, Evan Mobley, we know how great you are. We know you deserve Freshman of the Year, Player of the Year for USC, Defensive Player of the Year for the Trojans, and for the Pac-12 as well. But Anthony, give me your Defensive Player of the Year with that one for USC for players not named Evan Mobley.
Well, I mean, half of his name is Mobley. I'll go Isaiah Mobley because in really every game he was right behind Evan in terms of blocks. Now, I think there might have been one or two games where he had more blocks, but I mean, he was just still take out every still out there. It's not obviously not the same defensive presence, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Isaiah Mobley, too. I think it really showed itself most in the Kansas game. You had David McCormick, and, a lot of the talk going into that game was how Evan Mobley would match up against him. But Isaiah Mobley was actually on him a lot of that game, and he just had nowhere to go. He could do nothing down low. Obviously, we've seen him play tremendous defense the entire season, but I think that game, when you put him up against one of the bigger teams that they had played and one of the more talented bigs that they had played on the season, he just completely shut him down, and it was just start to finish. And then, he played incredible that game on the offensive end too. We'll get into some of the overall awards later, but that was one of his best games of the season, and I think the way that he played on offense, that game shouldn't overshadow what he did on the defensive end, because that was how they won that game. It looked like there were 7 Trojans on the floor at all times, and it looked like there were 3 Isaiah Mobleys. So super impressive performance there. That was probably my favorite individual defensive performance of the entire season from anybody on this team. So defensive player of the year, Isaiah Mobley. Anthony, give me your newcomer of the year. I didn't say freshman because there are so many transfers and not as many freshmen, but any newcomer. It can be a transfer, it can be a freshman. Newcomer of the year. Who you got?
This is one of my favorite questions because, like you said, so many transfers, and I really have to give it up to Drew Peterson. He evolved into being one of my favorite players to watch, just because it seemed like he was always calm, he was always in control. He didn't even start off the season starting. I don't know who was starting ahead of him, but he immediately became the starter. And, there were games where I can't remember which one, but he had about 20 points, and he was basically keeping them alive in the second half. And he played great during the tournament as well. I really didn't know anything about him up until the season, but he was an outstanding player. He's very versatile on offense, and on defense, he's lengthy, and he can defend a good amount. So he's my newcomer of the year. I hope he comes back. He's a junior. Definitely Drew Peterson. His evolution to being a consistent offensive threat. And even one game, I think he almost had a triple-double. So he's an all-around player, and I really enjoyed watching him. He's my newcomer of the year.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that Drew Peterson provided on the season was sort of a deep threat for a team that isn't exactly loaded with those deep threats. And it seemed like he always came up with threes in the biggest moments. And then on the rebounding too, he was an incredible rebounder. I mean, after the Mobleys, I don't have the stats in front of me, but it felt like he led the team in boards. I probably should have come prepared with that. But the way that he impacted so many games, there were so many games when he led the team in rebounds. And then he sort of, the way he turned it on at the end of the season too, from a scoring perspective, right? He had those 8 games before the first Oregon game where he was averaging something like 5 points a game. He was shooting like 18% from the field. He just didn't look all that comfortable. And then from there to the end of the season, he just seemed like he flipped a switch, and he was super important for them down the stretch. So that's definitely not a bad pick for newcomer of the year. I'm going to go with Taj Edey, if only for the fact that I think from a scoring perspective, from an offensive perspective, he was just such a good facilitator, and he always seemed to make things happen. He was second on the team in scoring with 13.6 points per game, and his 92 assists on the year were the most of any Trojan. And it seemed like he always, as the same with Drew, he always hit threes in the biggest moments. Of course, the UCLA one stands out, and maybe I'm being biased because that was like one of the best moments of the entire season. So I don't know, I tend to weigh that more, but it just seemed like there were so many nights when nothing was really working except for Edey, and because of him, they coasted to like double digit, couple dozen point victories, and it just seemed like he was often one of the constants. I know he wasn't like, necessarily a standout in the tournament, especially in the last couple games. But I think overall on the season, they needed strong guard play because we knew that the bigs were there. And I think Edey was able to provide that for much of the season. So I'm going to give newcomer of the year to him. But between him and Drew, I don't really think there's a wrong answer there. Overall player of the year, offense, defense, everything. Who is the Trojans MVP, not named Evan Mobley? Anthony.
I was actually going to say Tajiri. He was my choice for that. I mean, you could definitely say Isaiah Mobley, but in my opinion, there were games where Evan was off and really Isaiah was off, and Tajiri was the one who was keeping them afloat. Definitely can remember the first Utah game as a prime example, and then both Oregon games, he just shot the lights out, and he was amazing in both those games. And you talked about it. I think he was second in scoring beyond Evan Mobley. I think he might have led the team in assists. He was also the best three-point shooter on the team. So he was just a pure offensive threat. And there were games, specifically the Drake one, I clearly remember the second half where he was just on the defensive end. He just locked up Joseph Yusefu, who had a great first half. And he kind of embraced that role of being like a Joel Matthews type player. He was wearing the same number, and he was a great offensive player. And on defense, he was also outstanding. When he wanted to play defense, like when he wanted to lock the other player down or the guard down, he could do it. And I think for that, he's got to be the MVP. There were many games where he was the second player beyond Evan Mobley. At times, even I think he might have had 25. I forgot what game. It might have been against Cal or Arizona State. One of those where he had about 25 over. I probably should have checked before, but he kept them through a lot of tough times when the offense wasn't flowing. He was able to get buckets. And for me, he's got to be the MVP.
Yeah, definitely not a bad choice at all. I'm actually going to go with Isaiah Mobley here. And the reason I say Isaiah Mobley is I think in the tournament in March Madness, he was probably USC's best player, and that's including Evan Mobley. I mean, he was phenomenal. When you look at the Kansas game, especially, I keep on going on and on about the Kansas game, but he played ridiculous defense that game. He shot 4 of 5 from beyond the 3-point line. I think it was the first 4, and the 5th came in garbage. It came in garbage time. Granted, it was probably garbage time by halftime, but still. And I just think that as far as the future of this team goes and the direction of this team goes and how they might look the next couple of years, assuming he's coming back, I think Isaiah Mobley's improvement from last year to this year is maybe the single most important thing for this team. Because last year, he was fine, right? He wasn't a bad basketball player. He just didn't look quite as comfortable, quite as confident. The footwork wasn't quite there. And it seemed like his basketball IQ, which I think we flashes last year too, kind of gelled with his physical talent this year. And what you saw was a versatile player who can shoot, who can play defense, who can bully you down low. And I think that he's just such a more polished player now, and I don't think USC would have been nearly as good as it was if it weren't for the strides that he took. I think beyond getting Evan Mobley, who's obviously going to be the number 1 or number 2 overall draft pick, I think the single most important thing that the Trojans did in the form of one particular player was getting that increased output from Isaiah Mobley, because he was phenomenal this year. And yeah, like I said, in the tournament, he played great. He was probably their best player. So I'm going to give overall team MVP, not named Evan Mobley, to Isaiah Mobley. And actually, between the two, I don't think it was that far. Like, I don't think Evan Mobley was miles better than Isaiah, right? Obviously, Isaiah is not going to be going 1 or 2 in the draft, but I just think that as far as importance to this team goes and how much say they had in the Trojans' success and the reason why they went as deep as they did, I think it was pretty close between those two. And the team really rallied around Isaiah, right? He was the leader. I saw, after they won the Drake and the Kansas games, and I think the Oregon game too, or that might have been Isaiah White, but I think it was always, they have the videos of them taking their name and putting it on the bracket as like they advanced in the tournament. And for the first 2 games, it was Isaiah Mobley doing just that. And you always saw videos of him talking about the wins, and he was always shouting out his teammates, and he was always shouting out the coaches. And he's just this team's leader. And I think if Evan Mobley was this team's best player, Isaiah Mobley was the team's best leader, and this was his team in my eyes. And I think that as I said, they wouldn't have been nearly as good if it weren't for him. Anything else we didn't get to as far as awards go? Obviously, we're going to get to more of Evan Mobley, later on when it comes NBA season, draft season, when all those projections come out. But I sort of wanted to make sure that USC's other contributors sort of got a mention here because, you watch the broadcast and it's like Evan Mobley, Evan Mobley, Evan Mobley. By the way, his brother's on the team. Isn't that cool? And his dad's an assistant coach. But I think, as I said, when it comes to this team's success, there were so many other guys that were so important, and just wanted to make sure they all got their shout outs there, because if this team was just Evan Mobley, they might have made the tournament. They wouldn't have won very, very, very many games. So obviously Evan Mobley had an incredible season, but a lot of other guys did too. Let's move on and talk about what is next for this team, because now it is time to look ahead. Obviously, Evan Mobley is going to be going to the NBA draft. There was like a minute in there when I was like, what if he comes back for unfinished business? But honestly, I don't even know if I don't even think I want that. This is his time to go shine in the NBA. He's going to be a brilliant player for years to come. But USC still has many more seasons ahead, and they're not the youngest team. They obviously had a bunch of redshirt junior, senior, grad transfers on this team, and I think some of them are going to be coming back, some of them might not. So give me your general takeaways as to, I don't know, how you think the next year or two is going to go, what this team needs to address in the offseason, what are the most important steps this team needs to take to build sustainable success for the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, I think this year was a great building block, and it obviously depends on players coming back. And just to go real quickly through who's not coming back, well, the people that are obvious. Obviously, Evan Mobley, you talked about, Isaiah White, Tajidi, Chavez Goodwin, those are all seniors. Those are great contributors. And then if Isaiah Mobley, I would be very surprised if he leaves, but, if he leaves, then he's out of there too. So those are big pieces, but they do have returning rotational players like a Max Agbampolo, Ethan Anderson, Noah Bauman, if you count that, Drew Peterson, if he decides to come back, and then Reese Waters was one of the biggest recruits that they had. So they still have a lot of young talent, a lot of raw talent that has potential. They still got size. I think one of the players, Boubacar, 6'10", 3-star recruit. Joshua Morgan, 6'11", 3-star recruit. And then obviously, I think I might have missed someone. Reese Waters is another forward. So if they come back with the size and the length they have and defensive principles, and most of these players have, the difference between last year's and this year's team was that there was a lot of newcomers. So if you keep those newcomers on, it'll be easier to transition. And next year's going to be completely different. Obviously, a longer training camp and more time to be together and practice. So I know we're running out of time. I'm trying to say quickly, but one last thing though, they do have the number one ranking in the Pac-12 right now in terms of the recruiting, and they're 11th in the national, in the entire country. So if that is as accurate as it says, it might be a pretty prosperous year. But they still got loads of talent. I think it's going to be a breakout year for Isaiah Mobley. But we'll have to see. I still do think though that they'll be in it, especially with some key players coming back. And hopefully everything goes fine.
I want to get to the rankings real quick too, because when this team got Evan Mobley in the 2020 class, Evan Mobley, who was the number 2 ESPN recruit, maybe number 3, a lot of places had him number 1. It was pretty clear that he was going to be a one and done lottery pick, NBA draft kind of guy. They were the number 9 recruiting class in the Pac-12 and number 61 in the country this year. Number 1 in the Pac-12, number 11 overall. So the recruiting class, as far as the rankings go, might be even better. And then the other thing I think is super important for this team is to utilize the transfer portal and get as much out of it as they did this last season. And I think, Drew Peterson, Isaiah White, Goodwin, Edey, Mobley will be a beast. Yeah, definitely. He already is a beast. I think they're both already beasts. But you saw what they got out of the transfers this year, and as I said a couple of minutes back, they wouldn't have been nearly as good as they were if they weren't able to use the transfer portal like they did. And I think now, transfers around the country are going to see that and say, okay, Andy Enfield knows what he's doing. By the way, Pac-12 Coach of the Year. This team is nationally relevant. Like, everybody's starting to take notice of this being a basketball school. I mean, not a non-football school, but a basketball school also. And you saw how well the transfers played this year. You saw how quickly the team gelled. You saw the fact that they took, a bunch of different guys from a bunch of different places and had a really good product out of that. So I think that's only going to incentivize more guys to come and want to play for this school. And I think that if they can get, half as good of transfers as they did this last year, and you couple that with the recruiting class that, as of now, when it's still early, things can still change, but is looking as good as it did. I don't think this team necessarily has to take that big of a step back next year. I don't know if it has to take a step back at all. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the main players they had, Reese Waters. He's a 4-star recruit. He was already on the team this year. He even was playing. Same with I think Joshua Morgan, and they still have other 3-star recruits and a 4-star recruit coming in. And you mentioned it. The transfer portal is a big deal. Andy Enfield has now built that reputation of he can embrace these transfer students. And I mean, it happened last year too. Correct? They had 2 transfer students. So I mean, he kind of has that rep now. Will make it easier for people to come back. And, I definitely don't think it's going to be a step back, or at least a step back that people might expect without Evan Mobley. They're still going to be in the running in the Pac-12 for sure.
Moral of the story, the future still looks bright, and there is no shame in losing to Gonzaga. They made the Elite Eight. This season was incredible. And thank you to everybody, all of our loyal Dash Sports viewers who tuned in at any point throughout the season. We appreciate all your support. That is going to do it, unfortunately, for this edition of Trojan Dash. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we will be back. As I always say, I'm not sure when exactly we'll be back, especially with the season coming to a close, but I can assure you we will be back at some point. Make sure to follow us on all of our various social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Check out our content at Dash Sports TV. We do columns with Sports Pac-12. Anthony's got some awesome work going over there. Make sure to check out all that stuff and then watch all of our other shows from all of our various Dash Sports co-hosts. Back the Pack. There's never been a better time to get into Pac-12 college basketball than now. Anthony, any final words before we sign off?
Yeah, I think everyone should follow Nathan on Twitter, Phillies Nation. Everyone congratulate him. Definitely, he's giving me an excuse to read about baseball now. I have no choice to do it. Before I was, forced. Now I actually have to do it. So make sure to follow Nathan on Twitter. If you haven't followed him already, I don't know what you're doing. But yeah, please, Nathan just got his gig with Phillies Nation. Everyone check out his work.
It's true. Follow me on Twitter. Follow Anthony as well. Like I said, doing incredible work at Sports Pac-12, Daily Trojan. Anthony knows what he's doing right there. And yeah, I'm very excited for baseball season. But this has been an awesome basketball season. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.